What is up, YouTube? This is Dave Croft. I hope you are having a stellar day. Welcome back to another cue breakdown. This is a cue written for the 52 Cues Facebook group. If you don't know what that is, it's a group of like-minded composers, almost 200 of us in there, committing to writing at least one 2-minute cue per week for the entire year. So this is the cue for week 7. Every week there is a theme. Sometimes I'm able to write to the theme, sometimes I'm not, but I was able to hit this week's theme, which was the dramatic cue. So this is a cue written for the ongoing golf documentary that I'm working on, but with a dramatic cue, there's so many different kind of directions you could go. What does dramatic cue mean? So I opted for an emotional piano cue, very much in the style of Thomas Newman, August Wilhelmsen, or Rachel Portman, who were 3 references given to us by the client. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the sound, some of the compositional techniques, maybe some of the mixing components that went into making this cue, which I've titled Inner Monologue. So that was Inner Monologue, again, written for an ongoing golf documentary. So last week's cue, this week's cue, and the next couple of cues will all be kind of in this same vibe. And that vibe is from references given to us by the library. So this one's really leaning into the Thomas Newman space. And the next week, I'm going to be looking at a cue, and I'm going to be breaking down kind of my head behind or my thinking behind writing kind of Thomas Newman flavored cues. But one of the references, or one of the soundtracks I kind of leaned on for this, was the Finding Nemo soundtrack. Now, I didn't reference this specifically where I kind of followed it along. I'm definitely not making a clone, just almost like impressions of that. Specifically the scene, the track is called Haiku, and I'll put a link to that in the description, and maybe have a link floating above here so you can click on that. But the cue called Haiku, and if you're familiar with Finding Nemo, it's the scene where Marlin and Dory are in the whale, right, and they're kind of pushing in, and they're trying to, it's before they almost get eaten. Spoilers, but they don't get eaten because it's a Disney movie, but. It's the scene where they're kind of pushing in, and it's just kind of this swimmy, no pun intended, this swimmy kind of chordal motion over a pedal tone. And so it's not like I pulled up that cue and then like took it kind of beat by beat and said, okay, Newman did this and then he did this. No, it's just kind of my impressions on that. And so it really started first when I was writing this cue. It started with a big, dense pad. And so the pad that I'm using for this is from Glass and Steel by Spitfire Audio. And I really, really like this patch. It's very much kind of like bowed glass, bowed wine glasses, or, where you can kind of take a glass and kind of rub your finger on the top of that. And letting this pad just kind of sit and evolve. And it starts with this pedal tone. We're in a G tonality, so I start with G octaves and start building in fifths above it. So we have a fifth, and then moving down to the fourth, which gets me to one of the harmonic tendencies. Again, this is exceedingly reductive, but the harmonic tendencies of Thomas Newman, just from an observational standpoint, not like a score study standpoint. Fifths and fourths, unapologetic use of thirds, fifths, and fourths, kind of moving up and down over this kind of pedal. If you're unfamiliar with that term, that pedal means one tone just kind of hanging out, and chords moving on top of those chords. You can even see some areas where I experimented with some ideas, but muted them out. I thought I saw some, but maybe it's there. All right, so just kind of moving around. One of the things I really like about this Glass and Steel library is it's got a really long attack envelope, really long decay. And it just sounds pretty good, just kind of out of the box. I didn't do hardly any tweaking to any of these sounds. The next thing I layered in was another Spitfire library. This is the Evolution strings, the Evo strings. Evo strings 1, I believe. Now, then they have just recently redone these, and so it's no longer a contact library. It uses its own, but this is the old contact library. And how the Evo strings work is you have this grid here, and each of these notes represents a different articulation, and that articulation can be something where the string just they're bowing, and maybe like introducing a harmonic or something, or a little trill, or some sort of character to the sound. So it's not just a sustained note; it's a sustained note with some sort of evolution, some sort of movement, and they start out relatively subtle and get more intense as they go. And so you have kind of scary, tense, and different sounds. So this is the Evo strings doing much of the same type of chordal motion that the pads were doing. Threw in a minor or a major second there. The flat 7, right? So this would, if we were thinking modally, this would be Mixolydian. So going from G to G in the key of C. These didn't make the cut here. Matter of fact, I could probably safely remove those. All right, so using these, so with the pad, I played the pad at the same time, the pad's kind of hanging out on roots, fifths, some fourths, and then the strings sprinkle in some second, some sevenths, and some sixths. Not really hanging out on them for a long time. Okay, have a couple of other things that come into play here. I'm gonna have to start all over. You know what? Let me freeze some of these. I'm gonna freeze those so that I can start kind of in the middle. I know that Logic has kind of MIDI catch up, but that I find that causes more problems than it solves. So adding in a vocal pad, and this was some note that I got from the library when I submitted it. They said it needs a little bit more kind of vocally type sounds to it. So sprinkled in, this is kind of pad. And this is Vocalese from Heaviosities. This is their Gravity Pack. They have Gravity Pack. They have Vocalese 1 and Vocalese 2. It just sounds great. Nothing. And just sprinkle on top of these pads. And here we hear the third. All right, so we have a second, a third, up to the fifth, just kind of ebbing and flowing out of the texture, almost like a like a dolphin kind of cresting for air and then dipping back down. All right, I have a couple of other things which support the sound. I actually turned on the sub, didn't mean to do that. This sub is there just to provide the low end. It can be really tough to get solid, I have found in my experience. It can be tough to get solid, consistent, low end, talking 50 hertz below, just that really, that wake up your subwoofer type of a sound. That can be tough to get out of like an orchestral patch. You can get them out of pads, but it's not. It can be tough to get just a pure kind of sub tone, and so you can see it's just hanging out. Now this is a patch that I made in the EXS24, and by made I mean I didn't load a sound. And if you don't load a sound into the EXS24, then you get a sine wave. Now what I don't know is I don't know if that's an oscillator causing that sine wave, or if that's like a sine sample that just lives by default in the plugin. I'm not sure. Adjusted the attack envelope and the release a little bit, and so it's there just to provide the thick low end to this paddy pedal kind of atmosphere. And you can see my EQs. I went ahead and got the pad out of the way. The sub is chewing up all that low end, and I got the strings, just kind of get them out of the way so it doesn't interfere with any of the with the mix. It doesn't get in the way. All right. Next, again, I'm going to get to the piano. These are kind of like my melodic, for lack of a better term, some melodic things that we have. Now, what we've got going on here is a native flute that I actually bought from a Native American named John Two Hawks, and so he makes these or has them made. They're authentic, and I actually asked him. I asked him when I bought this, and even before I bought this, I said, John, I feel I should owe you an explanation. I'm looking to buy this because I am a composer, and I love this sound, and I want to use this sound in my music, in my production music. And I said, I want to be sensitive to that, because I know that there's tradition and history. There's a lot that goes into making these. Every part of this, it's handcrafted, hand carved. Every part of this means something to the culture. And so I said, I just want to be sensitive to that. And first of all, he thanked me for asking about it. He said, thank you so much for just even thinking about this. But he said, you honor the tradition by using it. Because these things weren't meant to be kind of set aside and just looked at, but it's meant to be appreciated and used, and it only helps to bring this out into the world. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but in short, I mean, he said, yeah, absolutely. I love that you would use that for your music. And when I wrote this cue, I sent it to him. I said, here it is. Here's a flute in action, and he loved it. He loved it. But it was something I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive to. I want to be sensitive to, and so yeah. And I am not a flute player by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah. So thank you, John Two Hawks, for that. And so yeah, just some flute parts here. Nothing, just let me isolate it so you can kind of hear it. Drenched in some reverb. You almost can't put too much reverb on these. And there's actually 2 reverbs happening just to even push it even more. It's a little airy. So I really had to cut out the low end, cut out the high end, so that it wouldn't be too much. But in the mix, I think it sounds really, really nice. then finally we have a couple of orchestral type flourishes, or just one really, just a light woodwind, and this is the flute and oboe and or English horn. That type of sound is used quite a bit in Thomas Newman and August Wilhelmsen type of cues. Actually, I think Thomas Newman has an EWI player, like an electronic wind instrument player, that does all of his things, and which is why it's like, is this a woodwind? I can't really identify the instrument. It's because it's an electronic instrument. And so this is a French horn from Vienna Instruments, Vienna. This is a special edition. In context. And for this, I definitely had a... Let me back up. One of my favorite movies is Castaway. And one of my favorite musical cues in Castaway is actually when the first musical cue that occurs. Spoilers upcoming for Castaway here. So Tom Hanks's character finally gets off the island. He's on his raft, and he's asleep on his raft. And Wilson, his friend, volleyball, right, falls off the raft and starts floating away. Okay? And so Tom Hanks's character has to go out and try to rescue him, but there's a point where he realizes that Wilson is gone forever, that he's going to lose Wilson. And he can either, he's got one hand, tied to holding the rope tied to the raft, and the other hand reaching out to Wilson, and he realizes that I can't, and I think he actually lets go. And he realizes that I can't save Wilson, but I can save myself. And so he reaches back in, and that's the first musical cue in the entire movie. There's not a lot of music at all. It's all about really sound design, and it's really excellent. But in that moment, there's this oboe that kind of comes out, and like a solo oboe line with some really light orchestration behind it. And it's just it's such a gut punch. Such a gut punch. And Alan Silvestri, my along with Thomas Newman, huge influence on me. And giant fan of Alan Silvestri's music, and have been since Back to the Future. But that oboe moment where it just kind of, there's this longing, really kind of deep emotion. That's absolutely kind of what I was kind of channeling through this. And I'll have a link to, if I can find that Castaway cue, I'll have a link to that in the description as well. All right, which brings us to the strings. I'm saving the piano for last. The strings, and one of the compositional techniques, or one of the compositional techniques that Newman incorporates is planing, which is where you take a chord and you kind of just move it up and down. Now you can have chromatic or diatonic planing, meaning planing if you have a major third, and if that interval of a major third stays a major third as it moves up and down the scale. Or you can have diatonic, where it's the interval of a third, but major third versus minor third depends on whatever key you're in. And so all right, so starting on the one chord, and really one of the longest major thirds that we kind of hear. Well, I guess the piano kind of hints at it. And this library is Symphobia, just really, really simple. Symphobia, not a ton of post done in that. And so we start with the tonic. And it goes, I'm not in G major, I'm in G mixolydian, which brings the F sharp to the yard, or the F natural to the yard, not the F sharp. The F sharp would sound like this. You get, yeah, it's a whole different vibe. All right, so let me turn off everything, but turn off the piano. And so the strings and the flute kind of trade off just a little bit here. Yeah, I guess that piano hints at that major third a lot earlier in the cue. Again, very, very, very simple. Just 1 to 7, flat 7. Then at the very end, flat 7 to 1. Okay, and so then finally, the main driving force behind this is this emotional piano. And there are a couple of things to keep in mind when you're playing emotional piano for me. First of all, relatively slow, lower in range, so it's not, it's not way up there. It's super low. Using a patch which is dark and somber, meaning that it doesn't have a ton of high end, and low velocities. Low velocities. You can take any piano sound and play it with these low velocities, and you get that kind of emotional vibe. And that's absolutely what I was going for here. And the patch that I'm using is the Maverick from Native Instruments, using the preset called Levitating Maverick, which is there. Now you do have to go in and start tweaking some of this, because sometimes some of these noises are a little too much, and when you have such a low velocity, then you start hearing the strings and the hammer. It just sounds like an unserviced piano, not an emotional piano. It sounds like an unserviced piano. And I think this might have like resonant space. They're just really, really, really long sounds. I thought they had one called emotional piano, but so I'm using the Levitating Maverick here. Change the lid if we want it even darker. Did you hear that release sound? Yeah, it's a little bit too dark. And so the part's really simple, and it's hinting at kind of some motion that let me back that up, that the strings were doing. So instead of going 1-7, it's kind of going a 2-1 type of a motion. And we'll turn the strings on. And it's thirds, but thirds split by an octave. So instead of stacked thirds, it's they become sixths, the interval of 6. And it's just kind of moving up and down the diatonic scale. So boom, boom is the motive. Overlap with the strings that come in. So then, so the motive is just this 2-1 type of motive in thirds, but they're sixths. Takes the tonic and then moves it down. All right, so here are the piano lines, and here are the string lines. Moving on again. So the piano never moves while the strings are moving. Coming into the end, and then everybody resolves to the 1 chord. So with emotional piano, it's about low velocities. It's about using sounds that have kind of darkness to them, and where we want to get that darkness from. If you imagine a hammer, in a piano with felt on it, and that felt is kind of the darkness we want. Now, the harder you hit a piano, the more compressed that felt becomes, and the more of the wood of the hammer that you hear. So we really just want to kind of feather the strings versus really kind of hammer into them. So just something to kind of watch out for when you're writing your piano parts. Lots of pedaling as far as the not pedal tone, but if I'm looking at the sustain pedal. Looking at the modulation of my Evo strings, it's kind of a slow build here. Just overall ebb and flow. The strings themselves are breathing a little bit. And there's some of that overlap. Because this is a slow string sound, I have to anticipate the attack because there is a slow attack envelope. And this overlap, you really don't hear this. Right? What you're trying to recreate is an entire orchestra all changing bows at the same time, and it's never going to be exactly precise, and you have to anticipate the attack envelope. So a lot of fun writing this piece. It was nice to kind of break away from some of the things I normally write, whether it's like an epic trailer cue or hip hop or something like this, and really not overcomplicating the melody, keeping it very simple, using these thirds up and down the scale, and letting things breathe, really letting things breathe. So I hope that you found this helpful and enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know below. And all the usual YouTube business, click the doobly-doo. I've heard another YouTuber call it the doobly-doo of subscribing, and if you want some notifications. So you do want to check out my other videos on the channel. I have some quick tips. But this is for week 7, and next week, week 8, I will be talking even more about Thomas Newman's writing style. So, thank you guys very much. Until next time, peace.